Welcome to Queer Conversation. In the studio with me today is Queer Screen's director, Lisa Rose. Hi, Lisa.
Hi, Silke.
Thank you for taking out time in your very busy schedule.
My pleasure.
30th Queer Screen Film Festival will launch in a couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm. There's 166 films playing across over 100 sessions in Sydney and surrounds, and on demand, and it's a lot.
Talking about on demand, so you are providing films to have access to through on demand. You even have an open air cinema session with lovely Kate Blanchett.
Yes.
And many cinemas throughout Sydney.
Yeah.
And additional to this, you, after this festival will be over, you go onto the Blue Mountains and to Canberra, which is fantastic. So let's talk about the different types of films that you are offering.
Yeah, it is. We've got our standard kind of like romantic dramas and rom-coms through to sort of like mysteries and then there is just a really kind of diverse range, and then obviously there's documentaries and things as well. And so our closing night film, The Venus Effect, is a sort of romantic drama from a romantic dramedy, as I like to call it, where it's from Denmark, and it's about like two women who meet each other, and it's really cute, kind of how they get together, and really sweet. But then they've also got sort of like this family drama that's kind of happening around them that's also quite comedic, and it's just a real crowd pleaser, and it's a really great way to end the festival. We've also, from like looking at a completely different genre, got a fantastic film from France, which stars Adele Lexicopoulos, who people would know from Blue is the Warmest Colour. And this film is kind of like a magic realism kind of film where it's about her and her daughter. And her daughter is probably about 8 years old, and she has this really strange ability to be able to reproduce smells. So she'll smell a smell and she'll be able to get all these ingredients together in this jar and kind of recreate it. And so she creates this particular smell, which makes her transport backwards to about 10 years to when her mother was sort of like a teenager. And it's just about this, she discovers this kind of love triangle between her mother and these two siblings. And it's just, I just can't stop thinking about it. It's just really, really interesting. It's really well made. Adele is fantastic in it, and it's just got these really interesting sort of mysterious elements that kind of slowly unravel as you're watching it, and it's incredibly engaging, and I hope that people go and see it. I love it so much that I'm playing it 3 times.
You have been a director of Queer Screen since 2017 and been on the board beforehand, so you would have seen a massive change on films that you're screening. So, for example, you just gave us an idea of this French film, which is, from its topic, very, very different than we used to have like 20 years ago. They were all about coming out and identity and so on. Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about that change that you have seen at Queer Screen?
There has been such a change in films about queer women, not only like the quantity of films that are getting made, the quality of films that are getting made. There's there's less tropes that are getting kind of presented. There's sort of more authentic kind of things that are potentially getting done, and like a really diverse range of people that you're seeing on screen. And from that genre perspective, like you say, like there was, people, the audience love to watch romantic dramas and romantic comedies. Like that is always the thing that people, like particularly queer women, are still really drawn to. But I'm really excited about the fact that there are some other things that might have romantic sort of elements in it, but have like those different kind of hit points that are kind of in it. There's a great film from Sweden called So Damn Easy Going, which is a coming-of-age romance, but at the same time it touches on as someone who has ADHD, and you don't get to see that very often on screen, and the way that they kind of present that film and how they showcase her her feelings that she's having around that is really fascinating, the way they do it on screen. And it's just a really lovely film that I hope people go and see. It's basically playing all the queer film festivals all over the world. And then you've got other ones that I have this theory about if you set a film in the past, it will never age out. Like it will always be able to be able to be watched, and you won't be like, oh, that's dated now, because of the fact that when you set a film in the past, it's very much stylized to that film and to that time and that period of time. And there's a film that we've got called You Can Live Forever, which is set in the 90s, like in the late 90s or the mid to late 90s. And that's very much my sort of coming out kind of period, and it is that thing about, again, two young women who meet, but it's set in this world of the Jehovah's Witness, and it's done in an incredibly respectful way, and it's a really sort of fascinating insight, not only into the 90s, which I love, but also into that sort of religion, and it's one of our fastest sellers.
What I've seen over the change over the last few years in films that are coming out, they are more diverse than ever, and not only within our own sexuality and identity, but it's inclusive of disability and the different cultures.
Yep.
Etc. Do you find that too?
We have not only the film about the girl with ADHD, but we've also got a film from the Philippines, which is called Sleep With Me, which is about two women who both are people with disability. One of them is a wheelchair user, and the other one has a more hidden disability of having like severe insomnia. And it's just about how they kind of connect over the fact that one of them has a late night radio show and the other one just listens to it because they can't sleep, and then they just randomly sort of meet through this sort of situation that happens, and it's really sweet how they kind of get together, and so there's that is one element, but it also is that aspect of just the diverse range of people that are seen on the screen. And back to the genre thing that you said, there's another French film that we've got called The Origin of Evil, which is just like, it's just so much fun, like, but not fun in like a this is hilarious kind of way, but fun in just like it's salacious and like just like these. It's a bit like White if you've seen White Lotus, it's a bit like that in the way that it's just these despicable people doing terrible things, but you're just fascinated while you're watching it, and the protagonist is a queer woman, and it's just kind of again a sort of a thing that's sort of unraveling as you go along, going like, what is happening? Who's telling the truth here? So it's great because there's so many different things.
What about documentaries? There are more and more that we see, even in mainstream television. What documentaries have you got? Yeah,
there's a few really fantastic documentaries that are about lesbian and queer women. There's one called Finding Her Beat, which is one of my favourite films in the festival. It's incredibly uplifting. It's about a group of queer women and non-binary people who are taiko drummers, which is a Japanese drumming, and it's traditionally performed by men, and so they get together to do this performance, and it's incredibly moving and uplifting and really fascinating, sort of what happens in that film. There's a really great one called In Her Words, which is about 20th century lesbian fiction, and it just kind of touches on basically every single lesbian like novel from the 20th century that you could possibly think of, and talks to a bunch of the authors and kind of what it was like for them. And we're going to be following it with a panel afterwards, giving sort of an Australian perspective, where we're going to have some Australian authors involved in that. And there also is one of our fastest selling films about queer women is called Gateway's Grind, which is a documentary that is about the Gateways Club, which was a famous club for queer women in London that existed for years and years and years. I think it started in the 40s or the 50s, and it's narrated by Sandy Toksvig, and she kind of investigates kind of what sort of the history of that club, and it's really fascinating to see what our forebears were doing back in the day.
Talking about panels, I'm always excited when I see that you have panels on there. Super interesting. And one panel which I thought was great for you to even come up with that idea, based on your 30 years anniversary, you have invited, was it the actors of the first gay people in a soap opera?
The Number 96 was a show that was basically on in the 70s, and I think it was the 70s and 80s. And it was incredibly like ahead of its time in terms of like how forthcoming it was. Like it had like a well-liked gay protagonist that was in the film, a lawyer called Don, and Joe Hasham, who's the actor that played him, is going to be talking to TV historian Andrew Mercado about that kind of impact. It also featured a bisexual character, and it featured a trans woman that was actually played by a trans woman in Carlotta, and it was completely ahead of its time, and it was like the first place in the world that was doing this kind of thing with that show and a couple of other shows. And so they've made a little short documentary they're going to play with it as well, talking about the fact that Australian TV was really outrageous, and then basically in the 90s it just became really conservative. And so it's really fascinating, and I think it's one of our biggest sellers actually, and I think people are going to find it really interesting to sort of look back at what was happening 50 years ago.
And talk a little bit about short films.
A lot of short films about queer women. My Queer Career, our Australian short film competition. There's 8 films that are competing for $16,000 worth of prizes, and they, there's a couple of First Nations stories in there, which is fantastic this year, and it's a really diverse range of films that's in there. We also have a Bi Plus Shorts, which we're doing, which is probably has the most laughs of anything that we have in the festival. There's a fantastic film that is called Show Pony that's in that film, in that particular package, that is just it just takes you in places that you're just totally not expecting, and it really makes you think, what would I do in that situation? And so that's worth the price of admission just to see that one. And there's also, we're doing 2 kind of packages that are really focused on queer women. There's a Lesbian Shorts and a Women Loving Women Shorts. In the Women Loving Women Shorts, we actually have 2 world premieres. An Australian film called Me and Herpes, which is kind of shot locally around here, and it's just a really fantastic sort of romantic comedy about these 2 women who kind of are getting together, and are they or aren't they, and it's really very, very funny and really well performed. And there's also another film called Women Meets Girl, which is also having its world premiere. It's from the States, and it is about 2 women who are very, very different and from different walks of life, and how they get together one evening. And it's a very conversation heavy kind of film, and it's just fascinating, the stuff that they kind of unpick with each other.
Heaps of content for audience to check out on your website. And how can they get tickets?
Yeah. So we're screening from Wednesday the 15th of February through to Thursday the 2nd of March. We had 8 different venues. Our main venues are Event Cinemas George Street, the Ritz in Randwick and Dendy Newtown, and we also have a few other venues, including Open Air, where we are doing the screening of Tar with Kate Blanchett in a pantsuit. Rocking it. And then people can get their tickets at queerscreen.org.au. So we actually have already had 2 things already sell out, and things will continue to sell out. There's probably more and more are going to be selling out in the lead up to the festival. So make sure people buy their tickets early, because you don't want to miss out.
Thank you, Lisa, for coming into the studio. Really
My pleasure.
appreciate it.
No worries at all.